Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
And thank you. Welcome back again. Yes, we're talking now on our Talking Books and Stuffs podcast to Ed Willis, famous for covering the Vancouver Canucks and even writing a book about them called Never Boring. But Ed, let's go back a bit and maybe you can tell us how, when, where, and why you got into the newspaper business.
Yes, well, yeah, that is a long and sordid story. I started in glamorous Medicine Hat, Alberta in 1982. I was there for 4 years. It wasn't the sexiest start, but it was the smallest paper in the southern chain at the time, and so it had resources. And when I was there, I was the editor, I was the layout guy, I was the columnist, I was the beat writer. I managed a 3-man staff for a while. So you did everything. And, because it was Medicine Hat, you could make mistakes and people wouldn't take it personally. So from there, I went to Regina. I was in Regina for 4 years. I went to Winnipeg. I was there for 7 years. Covered the Jets. Was the columnist there for a while. Did a freelance gig in Montreal, and I did a lot of work for the New York Times when I was there. And then I got hired in Vancouver, and I was in Vancouver for 20 plus years, working for the province first, and then the two newsrooms kind of amalgamated. So I was at the Province and the Sun in the latter years. So that's it. It's 40 years summed up neatly and succinctly in about 30 seconds.
So when you were in Medicine Hat, was that when Kelly Rudy was there?
No, I predated Kelly. I'm sorry, Kelly predated me. My first year there was the year Russ Farwell was hired as general manager of the Tigers. So, he eventually built Memorial Cup champions in the late 80s and went on to become the general manager of the Philadelphia Flyers for a short time. And then he went back to Seattle and ran the junior team there.
Right.
But when I was there, it was a really interesting time. Trevor Linden washed my golf clubs when I was in Medicine Hat. He was the kind of rising star of minor hockey there, and he was playing for the Tigers when he was 15. Saw a lot of NHL first rounders. Trevor was the most impactful, but there's a lot of guys like Wayne McBean who played there, and Mark Fitzpatrick, who was drafted by the Islanders as a goalie. Troy Gamble, another goalie who opted. It was a really interesting time, and a really interesting time in the Western Hockey League as well.
Now, when you were in Regina, you worked with Rob Vanstone, did you?
I did, yeah. Rob, and this is how old we are. I still remember Rob as the young guy on the staff. He had come from University of Regina journalism program when I was there. When he arrived, I think I was covering the Pats. I was the beat writer in the Pats. And I was kind of sort of slowly moving up the food chain. They let me write a couple of columns last year there, and that caught the attention of some people, and that led to the job in Winnipeg.
Now, I've had Rob on the show a couple of times, so yeah, he's a nice guy.
Yeah, well, wonderful colleague, been a wonderful colleague and good friend over the years.
Yeah, I've never met him in person, but we've talked a lot. Okay, now, before you got into the newspaper, what was your education background?
Well, I went to Carleton ostensibly to get a journalism degree. Didn't quite finish it. I was a little older than most people there, 23, 24. I'd been out working and supporting myself in bars and restaurants, and I got distracted easily in those years. So, I always wanted, my main goal was to be a sports writer. That was the only reason I went to journalism school. And the Carleton journalism program is a little more broad-based and well-rounded than that. Like, they went in, good for them. They wanted to produce, well-rounded journalists who could work in any number of platforms. I wasn't interested in that. I just wanted to write about sports. And so I left there. I moved out to Vancouver, figuring I'd be able to, it was a larger market, I'd be able to find my way in, and I couldn't. But that's why I was working there in bars and restaurants, trying to freelance. And that's when I got hired in Medicine Hat.
Did you have like favorite sports and stuff like that when you were growing up?
Oh yeah, like most kids, I was a fanatic about sports. I still have this encyclopedic knowledge of baseball from the, from the '60s to the early '70s, and I followed them all. But I quickly learned once I got into writing that is such a small piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
You don't get into it because you love sports. You get into it because you love writing, you love reporting, you love the newspaper business, and I found that out very quickly. So yeah, and then the other part for me is I've always been an avid golfer. I played competitively when I was younger, not great, but I was kind of in the mix, and I played at UVic for a year when it was a very small university, and so that's been the other part.
In the newspaper business, when you first started out, and even later on, I guess, any mentors or chaps or people that guided you along the way that you remember?
I was largely self-taught. There were a lot of people I admired, a lot of people whose work I watched and tried to emulate, or at least take parts or understand what made them good. And for the Canadians, it kind of started. Well, Alan Abel, who was the columnist of the Globe and Mail, was really the first kind of. He was just such an outstanding writer, and.
Yes.
And then Mike Farber at the Montreal Gazette, again, just an outstanding writer, and somebody I became friends with later on, which was really nice for me, and incredibly gratifying. Cam Cole in Edmonton, Steve Brunt at the Globe and Mail, like I said, and then a lot of American guys. When I was in Medicine Hat, they subscribed to this news service. It was the Field News Service, but it was it was the Chicago Tribune, the Boston Globe, one of the Denver papers, and I'm just blanking out on the other one. But so I would read the columnists,
right?
From Boston, from Chicago, from Denver, and that was an education too. It was just, wow, you can really write that way. It was really liberating to read these people, and the chances they took and the confidence they wrote with. That was a big influence on me in those early years.
Ed Willis is with us. We're supposed to be talking about his book, Never Boring, about the Vancouver Canucks, but it's fascinating, Ed, to hear your history. And first of all, okay, back to it, Never Boring. Why this book and why now? Good question. So I've been retired for 4 years now, and I was it's an interesting enough story. I'd kind of been casting around for another project I could immerse myself in, and I tried and thought of a couple of things. I thought of a couple of businesses I wanted to start revolved around writing, and nothing seemed to take. And I was on the internet one day, and it was Canucks fans were as usual were bemoaning the fate of their team, and right. Somebody wrote, what if this would have happened? Right. And somebody underneath it respond, what if, boy, there's a book there for Canucks fans, and it was like a little bulb went over my head, like in the cartoons. And I started to play around with that idea, and I thought, well, that is a great structure for a book. And so I identified about 11 moments in Canucks history when they seemed to be poised on the verge of something great. And not only did things go wrong at that moment, they went so irretrievably wrong, it set them back another 5-10 years, and then the cycle would be repeated, and it would be repeated again. And that's really the history of the Vancouver Canucks. Just when they seem to be on the verge of, breaking out of the cycle of mediocrity, they just can't get out of their own way, and this year was a perfect example. Like to say it's an isolated case, but it isn't. It is the history of this franchise. Well, I read your book in one day. I loved it. And I grew up on the West Coast in White Rock, Crescent Beach area, and I read the Vancouver Sun every day and delivered it when I was in junior high school, elementary and junior high school, and knew the Canucks like even in the Western Hockey League days. I even saw Saw a game at the old Queen's Park Arena with New Westminster Royals and Portland Buckaroos. But anyway,
Oh, cool. Yeah.
the Canuck, you're right. And reading the book, I got the sense of it's not necessarily the on ice. It's the management has seemed to have just kicked it around the block ever since before even day one. It's management. It's just failed to sort of take the ball and run with it.
Well, yeah, I think it's actually a level above management. I think it's ownership. And that, unfortunately, is another one of the recurring themes in Canucks history. There was a time there when Frank Griffiths ran it. It was at least stable, and they were pointed in the direction. And when he hired Pat Quinn, there was at least some kind of like uniformity and connectivity between ownership, management, and the coach. Now, that was basically Frank Griffiths to Pat Quinn, and nobody else's voices really mattered that much. But the rest of the time, they've just lose. So the Canucks' very first owner was a dude from Minnesota named Tom Scallon, who owned a medical insurance company because none of the heavyweights in Vancouver wanted to step up and own the Canucks. So this guy runs the team for a couple of years, and he finally pulls a stretch in Ocala prison for fraud, and that story it's just so Canucks. It's so complicated and convoluted, and from where I sat going through the research, it looked like he had been set up by this board of Vancouver businessmen who really wanted to take over the team because they could see it was going to be profitable. So that was the first one. Now, he gave way to Frank Griffiths, and like I said, I mean, the team wasn't always successful, but at least there was some stability there. Yeah. Frank Griffiths passed away and went to his son, Arthur. Arthur had good ideas, but he didn't have the wherewithal, especially when they landed the NBA franchise to own a building, own an NHL team, and own an NBA team. So that brings in John McCaw, and that ushers in another era of chaos and aimlessness, and then they give way to the Aquilini family, and they've had some moments of success, to be sure, but again, it's that pattern of kind of impulsiveness, of lack of long range thinking, of a coherent, solid plan to build the franchise around, and they've, just like I said before, they've kind of lurched from one calamity to another.
It's like I believe the Canucks are cursed. It's like Boston, they're cursed. There's nothing's going to crack through this thing, whatever it is, because I've got a list of names here. I'll just go through. Dale Talon, of course, the second pick instead of Gilbert Perreault. I know Barry Wilkins scored their very first goal against Los Angeles. I think I watched it on TV. So, and so Dale Talon, big story, a good hockey player who was managed poorly, would you say?
Oh yeah, no, 100%. I mean, everybody, and it's really unfortunate for Dale, because everybody hears that name and, oh, geez, we could have had Gilbert Perreault and we got stuck with this stiff Dale Talon. Dale Talon in his first year, I'd have to look up it. He had a remarkable rookie season for a defenseman. Yeah. To step in on an expansion team, and he had something pretty close to 20 goals and pretty close to 60 points. I mean, the market would lose their mind if a rookie stepped in. I mean, you just think of Quinn Hughes' rookie year, and Dale's was comparable, but the team was losing. He wasn't a superstar. If they would have had, again, if they could have surrounded him with some veterans, or could have insulated him a bit, let him develop on his own, I think he would have been an exceptional NHL defenseman. I think he would have consistently been that, 60 to 70 point guy, could run a power play. Yeah. He had great offensive instincts. Yeah. But on that team, so he lasts 3 years. They were afraid he was going to sign with the World Hockey Association because the Canucks lost a number of players to the World Hockey Association. So they traded him to Chicago for like 25 cents on the dollar. They got Gary Smith, the goalie, who gave them one good year, and Jerry Korab, the defenseman. But this was the second overall pick. This was supposed to be a franchise building block. Yep. And again, that pattern was repeated over and over again in those early years. They would draft a player like Jocelyn Gouvernement.
Yep.
And when he didn't turn into a star right away, they'd move him down the line. I get frustrated just talking about it.
Right. I've got to interject here. I loved your reference to Raymond Chandler in one of the early pages in the book.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites. That line has always stuck with me too. And it's not the first time I've used it.
If
you're going to steal quality, I always say.
Yeah. And bad luck, of course. Well, Cam Neely trade, everybody talks about that. Yeah. You opened the book with a discussion about Cam Neely. And again, was that management?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. And again, so if you contort yourself at such an angle, you could almost see their thinking. Just to familiarize people with what happened, the Canucks had drafted Cam Neely 9th overall from Portland. He played with them for 3 years. He showed some promise, but nothing like what he would become in Boston. The Canucks were terrible those years. They kind of cast about, and they settled on Barry Peterson, who was a BC kid who'd had 2 great years in Boston, but he'd come up. He had a tumor under his shoulder, and he had one and a. I think it's either 2 bad years this season and a half, whatever it was. But they figured no, he's still, he was basically a 40-goal, 100-point guy on very good Boston teams. So they make him an offer sheet. He would have been, in today's parlance, he would have been a restricted free agent, and that came with a pretty heavy compensation package. In the Canucks case, it turned out to be a first-round pick and Cam Neely for Barry Peterson. Well, Peterson never developed his form. Had he been that first-line center, and even the way Neely turned out, it might have been defensible, but Barry was really a support-level player when he arrived in Vancouver and couldn't lift the team. Neely, of course, turns into a superstar, and then the other part is that first-round draft pick turns into Glenn Wesley, who plays something in the order of 1,300 NHL games and is a top-level NHL defenseman. I think I wrote between 1970 and 1988, when they drafted Linden, Neely was the best player they would have drafted, and the second best player, if they would have kept the pick, was Glenn Wesley, and they got 3 seasons. The Canucks got 3 seasons out of those 2 guys.
Yep. Well, it's not sad, but you can't predict what's going to happen 2 and 3 years down the road. So, whoever thought Alex Burrows would be a key cog in the machine? And when you look at his early career, he wasn't drafted and went to the minors and stuff like that. So, I guess you got to get the right people at the right time in the right place. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, Chris Tanev is another really good example. An undrafted free agent, they signed and developed, and then they didn't re-sign him. So, anyways, I'm not going to go down that road.
Nope.
They've been lucky a couple of times.
Yep.
Lucky they've made some really nice moves a couple of times. I don't think there's a franchise that's benefited, the Neely example notwithstanding, I don't think there's a franchise that's benefited from one side of trade as much. You look at Alex Stoyanov for Marcus Naslund. When you look at the Todd Bertuzzi for Roberto Luongo, you look at the trade that got them both Sedins on draft day. Yeah. Some of the trades Pat Quinn pulled, when he gets Cliff Ronning, Jeff Courtnall, and Sergio Momesso out of St. Louis for Garth Butcher. I mean, the Kirk McLean trade with New Jersey, where they get Greg Adams and Kirk McLean for Patrick Sundstrom. Yep. Those are amazing. Those are franchise-building trades, but they could never really build on them enough to make that next step. They got close under Pat, and of course they got close under Alain Vigneault with the Twins and Alex Burrows, but they just couldn't quite get over the hump.
And of course, it's unfortunate choices too in the draft, I'm watching the draft a few years back, and there's Matthew Tkachuk is available, and they go for Ole, Yoli, and I can't pronounce his name. I don't want to disparage
Oli,
the guy.
that in Canucks lore, that it actually the first two, because Jim Benning was brought in as this, master super scout and a superb drafter who would uncover these gems. And I can't remember if it's his first two first rounders, but taking Jake Virtanen where they did, and then taking Olli Jokinen where they did, just set this franchise back again. When you're picking in the draft picks it really is a roll of the dice in a lot of cases. But the one immutable law is if you're picking in the top 5 or the top 6, you have to land an impact player. Because when you're picking there, you're a crummy team to begin with. And if you don't land a guy who's going to improve it, you're going to stay a crummy team. And that's what happened. And you look at the players that, the Canucks could have had, which is, again, another what if, when they drafted Virtanen, that could have been Nick Ehlers, it could have been Dylan Larkin, It could have been any one of a number of forwards who, turned into really good legitimate top six NHL forwards. And they'd settled on a defenseman when they took Jokinen. They passed on Michael Sergachev. They passed on Jeff Chickern. There's somebody else who I'm blanking out on who went, but no, they decided. Benning decided Olli Jokinen was their guy, and he was a complete bust, and then that hurt them immeasurably.
And of course, it's always a crapshoot because how many number 1 picks have we seen that have bombed out anyway? So you never really know.
No, you don't. But like I said, there's a couple of who knows that 4th or 5th round, or sometimes it turns out to be Jamie Benn. Yep. That's the crapshoot part of it. But like I said, when you're picking in the top 10, when you're picking in the top 5, you have to get somebody who's going to make an impact on your lineup. And the Canucks have just fumbled too many of those picks over the years.
What do you predict for them coming up?
Oh, God knows. I was interested. I mean, okay, like losing Rick Tocchet. And so that was another gut punch for Canucks fans. It looked like he was, a coach who could really maximize whatever talent he had available. Looks like they had finally stabilized thing, and there was order between Jim Rutherford down to Patrick Alvin down to Tocchet. So now they're starting all over again. I'm a big fan of Manny Malhotra. I covered him as a player for a number of years. I think he's a really smart guy. I think he's an able hockey guy. Yep. I think Adam Foote was the safe choice, and don't get me wrong, he's very qualified. But I just think Manny Malhotra might be a star in the coaching ranks. So there's that. And then, as for their team, okay, so they built the defense up. Goaltending's pretty solid, give or take Thatcher Demko. But where are the goals going to come from? Where is the offense going to come from? They need Elias Peterson to be that, 90 to 100 point center, and the jury is very much out on that.
And of course, that brings us back to the Stanley Cup run recently. With they get to the final and everybody's injured. It's just terrible. Everybody's injured.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's again. It's the hey, it's the Canucks.
Yeah, a couple more questions before I get soaked out here. Hockey nicknames. Why are they so boring?
Wow, I did not see that one coming. Look, you look at the culture of the game, and it isn't really given to. Flamboyant, creative types, they tend to be pretty predictable and pretty grounded in the game's tradition. So there's a couple I've liked over the years, but for the point, I think about my colleague. One of my favorite jokes about hockey nicknames came from my colleague Steve Simmons. Remember the defenseman Ron Haynes? He goes, "That's the one hockey player who you can't give a nickname to."
Oh yes, you can, Hainesy.
Yeah, well, that's it, but that's his name, so it's not a nickname. That would be it.
Right. Yes, I knew a guy who coached the Bellingham Ice Sox. His name was Sear, and I said, "What was your nickname?" Searsy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
And it's
exactly.
Greener and, Misey and, oh well.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's another story. I've got one quick more question. That's I kind of thought over the years, also on the other side of things, there was a few negative, shall we say, Vancouver media reporters, print and radio. I come to mind a couple of names.
Yeah. I mean, you can, but I at the team they were covering, and it was pretty hard to get the pom-poms out for them. I mean, I worked with Tony Gallagher for 20 years, and I give him all the credit in the world because he was brutally honest with the team, and he was so well connected. For the most part, what he was reporting was what was happening.
I guess.
So, it was. And there was usually one guy like that in the market, somebody with maybe a little harder edge. But like Tony showed up, and when management was out after him, they tried to have him removed on at least 3 different occasions, probably more when I think about it. Mind you, they tried to have me removed a couple of times too. But that was an issue with ownership. So yeah, I'm not so sure about that. And the way things have evolved now, it just kills me when people talk about Vancouver as this like brutal hockey market where the players are under so much pressure. Like in today's world, it's basically the rights holders who cover it on radio and TV, and newspapers they're gutted now. They barely. I'm not sure if our guys even travel with them anymore. So
right.
It really isn't. I saw the same thing, the same storyline popped up when Toronto got eliminated again. All the massive pressure the Leafs are under, and I went, yeah, maybe for some players, but I mean, if you've got the goods, you've got the goods, and that stuff doesn't bother you.
Right. Okay, one quick more question. Tell us again about the book, the title, and where we can get it, and why we should read it.
Well, it's never boring, and it's a book for Canucks fans, but I think it's for really all fans who've suffered for their team. I think like fans of the Buffalo Sabres could look at this and nod in agreement and go, "Oh yeah, boy, I recognize that." It's that. I know it's available on Amazon. It's probably still available in bookstores in British Columbia. It did really well. It was on the bestsellers list for 7 months, and usually in the top 3. And then it seemed like everybody who was going to buy the book bought it, and it's not on the bestsellers list anymore. But it's still available. It's still around, like I said, either through Amazon or through bookstores in British Columbia.
Right. Okay, Ed, thank you very much. We'll get the word out. Maybe we'll sell a few more copies.
Thanks very much, Dennis.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.